Experts agree that eating meat causes cancer. The International Agency for Research on Cancer has classified processed meat as a carcinogen, something that causes cancer. And it has classified red meat as a probable carcinogen, something that probably causes cancer. IARC is the cancer agency of the World Health Organization. And in the picture at right, you can see some hot dogs. That's 80% of all meat consumed. Processed meat includes hot dogs, ham, bacon, sausage, and some deli meats. It refers to meat that has been treated in some way to preserve or flavor it. Processes include salting, curing, fermenting, and smoking. Red meat includes beef, pork, lamb, and goat. One way that a lot of people are getting their cancer is by eating meats. And after careful consideration of the science, overall meat consumption has continued to rise in the US, European Union, and developed world. Despite a shift toward higher poultry consumption, red meat still represents the largest proportion of meat consumed in the US at 58%. 22% of the meat consumed in the US is processed. The scientific community has made its pronouncements public, and people flock to processed meat restaurants or burger joints as if there was no tomorrow. Huge chains spread out around the world with Macs and Whoppers and all sorts of processed meats which are certified to cause cancer. Why don't they just call it the cancer shop? The results were predictable. In 2018, an estimated 1,735,350 new cases of cancer will be diagnosed in the United States, and 609,640 people will die from the disease. People are reaping what they sow. So, why bother with eating meat when there are plenty of good alternatives? Some people decided to quit eating meat. 5% of the country say they never eat meat, fish, seafood, or poultry. About half of these vegetarians are also vegan, recognizing that animal meat is not the best food. A lot of people have quit eating it, and industry has stepped up to the plate with a number of meat alternatives or meat analogs, products which, while not having the same cancer risks as meat, also have their own risks. Meat substitutes look like the real thing. Very tasty, often made from soy. And egg whites, see my video on eggs. So they're not even vegan and always contain MSG. MSG has neurotoxic effect leading to degenerative changes in neurons and astrocytes in cerebellar cortex of albino rats. Getting more attention to the constituents of food products is recommended. This is a Saudi study with somewhat alternative English talking about how MSG causes brain cell death and brain disease. Two main excitotoxins, together with aspartate, glutamate is the major excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. Chronic excitotoxicity has been hypothesized to play a role in numerous neurodegenerative diseases, including amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, that's ALS, Alzheimer's disease, and Huntington's disease.
And an excitotoxin basically is any substance that causes brain cells to become very excited, and they start firing their impulses very rapidly. And they fire so rapidly that this cell will become exhausted and die.
These are neurotransmitters which can be isolated, concentrated, added to foods to make them taste really good. And when they get into the brain, they can overwhelm cells, get them really excited, and they can die, as Dr. Blaylock explains. So instead of cancer from real meat, you get brain cell death from MSG. Overwhelming brain cells with pleasure, making people really, really happy, but the cells get so overwhelmed that they die. But don't you have a lot of brain cells? You do. So the effects are not observed immediately. It's a silent process, killing the brain cells one by one, or 10 by 10, until finally you have a lot of brain cells in a particular area of the brain, and that will determine the manifestation of the disease, whether it's Alzheimer's or ALS. It depends on the area where the tissue has been damaged. This is something that is added to processed foods. MSG, or monosodium glutamate, is a synthetic chemical that is added to manufactured and processed foods to make them more palatable. This form of free glutamate is present in almost all processed foods and is valued by manufacturers for imparting a pleasing, savory taste. Why should food which is heavily processed, cooked, stuck in a can, and can sit in there for 3 months, 3 years, why should that taste really good instead of kind of stale? MSG is the key, and they're very liberal in adding it to the processed foods.
It's because the number one source of excitotoxins in our society is in your food. And it's not in your natural foods, it's being added to your food by the industry that processes foods. And they're adding it in very large concentrations.
But what if the label doesn't even mention MSG? The various deceiving methods they use to keep you from knowing they're there. Disguising names like hydrolyzed vegetable protein, textured protein, protein extract, whey protein extract, enzymes, yeast extract, autolyzed yeast, natural flavoring, spices, sodium or calcium caseinate, carrageenan, broth, and stock. So the next time that you're browsing in your local health food store or book and Bible house, look out for these ingredients on the cans and labels on the other packages and see if those names are present. If they are, you know there's MSG in the product. You know that the MSG is associated with brain cell destruction. Consume these products at your own risk. We consider a concrete example, chicken seasoning. It's labeled vegan, but gives you the taste of chicken, and shows both disodium inosiniate and disodium guanylate on the label. Disodium inosiniate is used as a flavor enhancer in synergy with monosodium glutamate to provide the umami taste, that is, the savory taste. It is often added to foods in conjunction with disodium guanylate. As a relatively expensive product, disodium inosiniate is usually not used independently of glutamic acid. If disodium inosiniate is present in a list of ingredients, but MSG does not appear to be, it is possible that glutamic acid is provided as part of another ingredient. A phenomenon that we learned about from the list of code names. They have all of these clever names that customers won't say, oh no, there's MSG in that product. Instead they buy it and maybe they don't know just what carrageenan is, or they think textured vegetable protein. Protein is good, the body needs it. I'll buy it. And then when they eat it, it tastes really, really good, so they come back and buy more. And then there's Bill's Best Chickenish. It's vegan, of course. Soy flour, salt, food yeast. They say there's no MSG in it, but what are the labeling requirements for MSG? We check in with Dr. Blaylock on that.
And the law allows them to do it, because the FDA law says that only if it's 99% pure MSG do they have to put it on the label. So it can be 98% MSG, and they don't even have to put it on the label. They can use one of these little names. And so you're not protected when you see it contains no MSG, or you go to the restaurant and you say, did your food contain MSG? And they say no. But it contains hydrolyzed vegetable protein or some of these others. And sometimes they don't even know. You'd be amazed how many people in restaurants have no idea that hydrolyzed vegetable protein is monosodium glutamate concentrate.
Note the yeast. Ingredients such as yeast extract or autolyzed yeast and hydrolyzed yeast all contain a percentage of free glutamates or glutamic acids. Here are some examples of foods with yeast extracts while saying no MSG. These are extracted from the truthinlabeling.org website. McKay's Chicken Style Instant Broth and Seasoning. Nightlife Foods Tofu Pups. Simply Organic Spicy Chili. Hain Pure Foods All Natural Chicken Broth and Vegetable Broth. Newman's Own Ranch Dressing. If you're not buying fresh produce or bulk foods, you need to read those labels closely. Yes, they're tricky about it. Maybe they have a product that is 50% MSG. But what are the FDA labeling rules? Do they agree with this contention that there might be cover names out there? FDA requires that foods containing added MSG listed in the ingredient panel on the packaging as monosodium glutamate. However, MSG occurs naturally in ingredients such as hydrolyzed vegetable protein, hydrolyzed yeast, yeast extract, soy extracts, and protein isolate. But there are a lot of food products out there, and the FDA just doesn't have time to test all of them. But what about tomatoes? The MSG in naturally umami-rich foods is found in harmless amounts, but the concentrated doses associated with foods like ramen, processed products like hamburger helper, and salty fast food products have been linked with negative health effects. That's the stuff you want to avoid. We also note that there are some differing varieties of glutamate. Natural glutamate in plants and animals is known as L-glutamic acid. In contrast, processed free glutamic acid, MSG, contains both L-glutamic acid and D-glutamic acid, and is also accompanied by pyroglutamic acid and other impurities. The impurities differ according to the starting materials and methods used to produce the glutamic acid. It is only acid hydrolyzed proteins that contain mono and dichloropropanols, which are carcinogenic, and it is only reaction flavors that contain heterocyclic amines, which are also carcinogenic. By FDA definition, processed free glutamic acid, MSG, is naturally occurring because the basic ingredients are found in nature. Naturally occurring does not mean that a food additive is being used in its natural state. Naturally occurring only means that the food additive began with something found in nature. By FDA definition, the ingredient monosodium glutamate is natural. So is hydrochloric acid, so is arsenic. And how is this produced? Processed free glutamic acid is created when protein is either partially or fully broken apart into its constituent amino acids, or glutamic acid is secreted from selected bacteria. A protein can be broken into its constituent amino acids in a number of ways: autolysis, hydrolysis, enzymolysis, and or fermentation. When a protein is broken down, the amino acid chains in the protein are broken, and individual amino acids are freed. The protein is processed using various methods, broken down to its amino acids individually, freeing the glutamic acid, which can then be concentrated and added to processed foods to make them taste good. And once the free glutamic acid gets in, glutamic acid is a neurotransmitter that excites our neurons, not just in our tongues. This electrical charging of neurons is what makes foods with added free glutamic acid taste so good. Unfortunately, the free glutamic acid can cause problems in many people. Actually, our brains have many receptors for glutamic acid in some areas, such as the hypothalamus, do not have an impermeable blood-brain barrier. So free glutamic acid from food sources can get into the brain, injuring and sometimes killing neurons, says the American Nutrition Association. The excitotoxins get into the brain, they kill brain cells, and the authorities agree that this is happening. So read your labels. You know the code words to look for? And even better, why not pick simple natural foods? Save your money, save your brain.